Before we begin tonight, I just want to give a shout out to my brother-in-law, Larry. He's doing much better, but it was touch and go. He had some problems with his craw, and he ignored it. And, well, don't ignore your craw. It all started back in October of last year when Kamala Harris didn't campaign with AOC and Bernie, and he said, that's really starting to stick in my craw. And I said, you should get your craw looked at, Larry. And then, of course, Trump wins in a tight race, but says it's a landslide. And Larry said, that's sticking in my craw. I said, Larry, get your craw looked at. Too much stuff is sticking in your craw. Bobby Kennedy, Pete Hegseth, Christi Noem, it all stuck in Larry's craw. He never once went to the doctor to get his craw looked at. I said, Larry, get your craw drained. And my telling him that, you guessed it, that stuck in his craw. Finally, 2 nights ago, what started out as an impacted craw turned into an infected craw. He was rushed to the emergency room. They drained thank God, they were able to drain his craw. He almost went into septic shock, so it was a matter of hours. Don't be stupid, people. Get your craw looked at. It's the not-so-silent killer. The one thing I'll say about me is I always get my craw drained because for some reason, a lot of things get stuck there. Well, Italy, which played host to the Pope's funeral Saturday, unlike the United States, is a signatory to the International Criminal Court. This is said to be why Russian President Vladimir Putin didn't attend for fear police in Rome would be obligated to arrest the Russian leader and send him off to The Hague to be tried for war crimes committed in Ukraine. It's the same reason Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu didn't attend. There's also a warrant issued by the same international court to arrest Netanyahu for the war crimes he's committed in Gaza. No such warrant exists for Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. For the first time since their Oval Office food fight back in late February, Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky met Saturday inside St. Peter's Basilica before the Pope was buried. White House spokesman Stephen Chung was on the Vatican trip. He said their meeting was productive and then asked if anyone had some more of those communion wafers. Zelensky called the Trump meeting more symbolic than historic, but he later took to social media thanking Trump for seeing him. Afterwards, Trump admitted to having some concern that Vladimir Putin doesn't seem to want to bring an end to the fighting in Ukraine. Aren't you the observant one? Trump added, Putin could be, quote, just leading me along. Trump now telling Time magazine he was joking last year when on the campaign trail he kept promising that if elected, the war in Ukraine would be over on day one of his new presidency. He was joking, he said. He said, I said it in jest. Roll Call reporting late Saturday that their database shows Trump making that joke 53 times during 53 separate campaign appearances last year. Hey, if the joke is funny, keep telling it. Here, this is one version of the joke. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly. I will get the problem solved, and I will get it solved in rapid order, and it will take me no longer than 1 day. I know exactly what to say to each of them. Wow, that is funny. Here's another version of the joke. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in 1 day, 24 hours. First, I'll meet with Putin. I'll meet with Zelensky. They both have weaknesses, and they both have strengths. And within 24 hours, that war will be settled. It will be over. It will be absolutely over. You got to admit, that's pretty funny. He said this in jest. Here, I will settle the war in Ukraine before I even take office. I'll settle it as president-elect. I met with President Zelensky the other day. I know President Putin very well. I'll get it settled, unquote. Yeah, pretty funny. Pretty funny. Senate Republican Chuck Grassley of Iowa on the receiving end of angry constituents at town halls demanding he stand up to Trump. Well, Grassley finally issued a statement on Friday accusing Putin of playing America as a patsy. And then Grassley took the unusual step of calling on Donald Trump to tighten economic sanctions against Russia instead of loosening them, something Trump said last week he's planning to do. But now, late Saturday, Trump saying he's considering more sanctions for Russia. He's considering them. It's hard to tell when he's joking, isn't it? Trump pretending is what he's doing. He's pretending he has any choice in the matter. We know he can't defy Putin, so he goes through the motions of acting like he might defy Putin, but he wouldn't dare. Dan Coates, Trump's very first director of national intelligence, told Bob Woodward last year he's convinced Putin is blackmailing Trump, that Putin has something on him. So Trump postures like he's keeping an open mind when it comes to Russia, but it's just an act because in the end, when it's time to put money on the table, as they say, no matter what, he will, in the end, side with Putin. The same way some of my friends who always vote for Trump now say they're keeping an open mind, that they're not thrilled with a lot of what Trump's doing right now. But I can assure you, when it comes time to put money on the table, when Trump decides to run for a third term, they'll pretend all the way up until Election Day, it's not the best idea. I'm uncomfortable with it. But in the end, they will vote for Donald Trump when he decides to go for a third term. I keep telling you, there's what people say and what they do. And the only way not to get sucked into Trump's vortex of chaos is by paying attention to what he's doing, what he's trying to accomplish, not what he says he's doing or what he's accomplished, because he's a liar. Trump says his tariffs are non-negotiable, and in the very same breath claims his non-negotiable trade negotiations are going terrifically because I hold all the cards and everybody's kissing my ass. That's what he said. His words, meaningless. The book of Matthew, by their fruits you will know them. That is not to say we should completely ignore what Trump is saying. Before peace negotiations between the United States and Russia even began, Trump repeatedly said Ukraine must acknowledge Crimea is now Russian territory. He said the United States is prepared to recognize Crimea as such. Those are more than just words. Those are also his fruits. The same way tariffs and the terrorizing of migrant communities were campaign promises, words that soon flowered into fruits. He repeatedly said the tariffs and the ICE roundups were coming. He also repeatedly said he was against Ukraine, and we're seeing the fruits. He's against Ukraine. This week, he repeatedly and angrily condemned Zelensky for refusing to cede Crimea, calling Zelensky personally responsible for what Trump called the killing fields of Ukraine. J.D. Vance, while traveling in India earlier in the week, said the United States will walk away from the bargaining table if Zelensky didn't agree to stay out of NATO and give up, in addition to Crimea, what amounts to 20% more of Ukraine in and around the Donbass region, which is now controlled by Russia. So J.D. Vance is saying, we'll walk away from the table unless Zelensky agrees to give up about 30% of Ukraine. It's no accident Vance said this. He was doing it on behalf of Trump. And it's no accident that because he said that, Putin responded by ratcheting up the attacks on Kiev. Trump signaled, go ahead, Vladimir, take all of it. Now, Trump says he's trying to negotiate a peace. He says he wants the killing to stop. So he says. Putin is committing genocide in the Donbass. Not a word about that from Trump. So do you think giving Putin more of Ukraine would stop the killing, will stop the genocide? Who negotiates peace this way? Unless, of course, you want Ukraine to lose. That's what Trump wants. Trump is essentially trying to dictate to Ukraine the terms of surrender instead of negotiating a lasting peace. And this is only going to embolden Putin. He's launching missile and drone strikes on civilians, not just in Kiev, but throughout Ukraine, throughout all of last week. Putin feels free now to kill with abandon. The Trump White House saying either Zelensky surrenders or America walks away and no more weapons. We don't care what happens. In other words, we're giving Putin a green light to take over all of Ukraine, and we're not lifting a finger to stop him. No more military aid. That's what Trump is saying and doing. But he's spinning it to look like it's not capitulation to Russia. He's spinning this to make it sound like Trump offered to help Zelensky, but Zelensky didn't want my help, conveniently leaving out that Trump's help means surrendering before peace negotiations even began. Trump's cagey. We all know he's beholden to Putin, terrified of him, but he can't admit that to the world. So he gaslights, he manipulates to make it seem that he gave Zelensky every chance for peace. But Zelensky, he's impossible to deal with. Trump has been consistent painting this exact narrative since day one, since he returned to the Oval Office. He has been consistently saying and doing that. In an interview this week with Time magazine, Trump was asked point blank, well, you've told us all the demands you're making of Zelensky, but what demands are you making on Putin? Trump's answer, quote, stopping the war. That's his demand. Stopping Putin from taking all of Ukraine. That's his demand. We will give you everything, Vladimir, everything you want if you agree to stop trying to take it. This is precisely what British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain said returning from Munich after meeting Hitler. In 1938, Chamberlain signed away parts of Czechoslovakia, then declared peace in our time, convinced Hitler's thirst for more of Europe had been quenched, and we all know what happened next. But I have to hand it to Donald Trump. He's actually made it possible to compare him to both Hitler and Neville Chamberlain. I mean, that's pretty good. He's Hitler and he's Neville Chamberlain. He can negotiate against himself. So Americans might have their own opinion on Ukraine. No doubt many think Trump and even Neville Chamberlain were right. Stay out of it. There's always been a strain of isolationism running through our nation's DNA, going all the way back to President George Washington, who, in his 1796 farewell address, warned against foreign entanglements, saying, quote, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliance with any portion of the foreign world," unquote. Isolationism. George Washington. So I loathe America's permanent state of war for the same reason I loathe Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They are all wars of empire. I object to wars of empire. So Americans right now have the luxury, some Americans think they have the luxury to ignore Putin and to ignore Ukraine. Europe, on the other hand, can't afford isolationism. Both sides of Europe's political aisle agree. Putin must be stopped. It's pretty amazing to see how many European leaders are on board the anti-Putin bandwagon. If you look at the European Parliament, since the invasion of Ukraine, only about 12% of the members have either voted against or abstained from measures condemning Russia and measures that imposed economic sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine. That's a big parliament. Only 12% have voted to protect Russia. This despite Putin funneling millions and millions and millions to right-wing authoritarian candidates throughout the continent. And while Putin's puppets were willing to give him a pass back in 2014 when he took Crimea, none of them said they were okay with his 2022 invasion of Ukraine. They couldn't be for that. Giorgia Meloni is the Italian prime minister. She's a neo-fascist. As leader of the Brothers of Italy, she is the first neo-fascist leader of Italy since Mussolini. Even she is standing up to Putin. Immediately after Trump screamed at Zelensky late February inside the Oval Office, she flew straight to London and met with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, along with all the other European leaders and Canada, to draw up plans for standing up to Putin without the United States. Even Matteo Salvini, the leader of Italy's far right League Party, condemned the invasion of Ukraine. Again, like many puppets, he was fine with Russia seizing Crimea back in 2014. Back then, he spoke out against economic sanctions that were imposed by Obama and Europe after the taking of Crimea. He even wore a pro-Putin T-shirt inside the European Parliament. But once Putin invaded Ukraine, even Salvini pulled a 180, condemning the invasion. Marine Le Pen, the far-right leader of the National Party in France, who has taken about $11 million from Putin that we know of, even she condemned his invasion of Ukraine and said Ukraine's full sovereignty must be restored. Granted, she's not given a full-throated condemnation of Putin, but she's hiding pictures that she used to be proud of her meeting with Putin. She is for giving Zelensky defensive but not offensive weapons. She's also questioned the wisdom of economic sanctions against Russia, but even she knows in France the math isn't there to be pro-Putin because the French know the true meaning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They've lived it several times. So what Vance and Trump are proposing is the first official surrender of European territory seized by military invasion since World War II. It's quite remarkable. No American president since World War II has ever signaled a willingness to recognize European territory seized militarily by a foreign adversary. An argument can be made that Ukraine is Europe. The United Nations, the International Criminal Court, all condemn Putin and the invasion of Ukraine. But Vance, our vice president, and Trump now making the argument that Russia should keep Crimea, keep roughly 30% of Ukraine because they claim Russia is stronger militarily. That's the Trump doctrine. Might makes right. Trump repeats it clearly all the time. He says it's Putin, not Zelensky, who holds all the cards. Therefore, Putin is entitled to take whatever he wants. That's the Trump doctrine. This runs counter to the entire post-war world order set up 80 years ago by all the countries that defeated Germany. All the countries, including Russia and Germany. But somehow, here in the United States, we found the dumbest person on the planet, Donald Trump, and said, have at it. Even Viktor Orban, the far-right leader of Hungary, who is also on Putin's payroll, condemned the invasion of Ukraine. Granted, he hasn't been particularly cooperative. He has spoken out against economic sanctions. He's against Ukraine joining the EU as well as NATO. But Hungary is a member of both NATO and the EU and has increased defense spending since the invasion of Ukraine because, despite Viktor Orban's fidelity to Putin, the Hungarian people remember Russia. They remember Russia invading Hungary in October of 1956 to tamp down protests in Hungary against Soviet control over their country. And by the way, the Soviet Union did invade Hungary, but they pulled out of Hungary, recognizing that nation's sovereignty. This is why all of Europe, on both sides of the political aisle, except for Belarus, this is why they're all standing up to Putin. But here in the United States, we have what is called the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party, and Donald Trump leads it. You know why. Read the Mueller report. You saw him in the Oval Office with Zelensky. You see the concessions he's making to Putin. Marjorie Taylor Greene simply parrots Russian talking points, word for word. Word for word. The only thing coming close to the pro-Putin wing of Trump's Republican Party is Alternative for Germany, the neo-Nazi party that J.D. Vance and Elon Musk openly supported in Germany's last election on February 23rd of this year. German secret police report the Alternative for Germany party is funded by Putin, the same way Putin funded Trump, the same way Putin funded Marine Le Pen in France. In the run-up to the German elections this year, the Alternative for Germany party spoke out against economic sanctions on Russia. But at the same time, Alice Weidel, she's the leader of the Alternative for Germany party, she did speak out against Russia's invasion of Ukraine back in February of 2022. Even the Nazis in Germany spoke out against Putin invading Ukraine. She did blame Ukraine for inviting the invasion. She said Zelensky, by signaling his willingness to join NATO and the EU, he triggered Putin to invade. But even this Nazi said the invasion of Ukraine is wrong. She's the closest Europe comes to our Republican Party's pro-Putin wing. I've tried It's almost impossible to find anyone in Europe as pro-Putin as Donald Trump and his pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party are. I mean, there are some crazy fringe elements that are not worth talking about in Europe, but elected parliamentarians, you cannot find anyone in Europe, no matter how right-wing, as pro-Putin as Donald Trump and the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. Well, how big is it? Liz Cheney, Republican, former Colorado House Republican Ken Buck, who retired last year, and former Senate leader, Republican Mitch McConnell, all speaking out against the pro-Putin wing of their party. Tennessee House Republican Tim Burchett even suggested that some of his fellow House Republicans are being blackmailed by Putin because of their sexual peccadillos and indiscretions. Burchett literally said last year that Russian operatives are dropping photographs on the desks of his fellow Republicans to get them to vote the way Putin wants them to. So, how big is the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party? There's what they say, and then there's how they vote. Okay. In the summer of 2023, almost 2 years ago, Biden began begging Congress to authorize weapon shipments to Ukraine. Ukraine began running out of weapons during the fall of 2023, and it was starting to lose territory. So that was in the late summer of 2023 where Biden was saying, we got to get weapons to Ukraine. It wasn't until April of 2024 that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, finally got around to passing a $61 billion aid package for Ukraine. That was 8 months after Joe Biden said, we need to get military hardware to Ukraine. And Mike Johnson, our Speaker, delayed the vote. Why? Well, he's a white Christian nationalist, and so is Putin. Putin is perceived as the great white Christian hope inside the Republican Party, not Zelensky. So Johnson knew it wouldn't look good for Republicans not to pass the $61 billion aid package for Ukraine, but he delayed it. Biden wanted it by September of 2023. Johnson got it passed in April of 2024. Because we all know in war, time is never of the essence. The longer Ukraine went without American military aid, the more land Putin was able to seize. See, Mike Johnson and the Republicans waited just long enough so he couldn't be accused of being part of the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. Just long enough to help Putin by not sending weapons to Ukraine, just long enough so he can say, hey, we passed the bill 8 months too late. How big is the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party? Because we're told it's just a handful of crazies. The bill giving $61 billion in military aid and humanitarian aid to Ukraine that passed in April of last year, it passed in the House 311 to 112, with a majority of Republicans voting against it. 112 Republicans voted against that bill. That's more than half the Republicans of the House of Representatives. who voted against the $61 billion aid package for Ukraine, which means it is not a handful of crazies who make up the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. More than half, at least in the House of Representatives, are part of the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. 15 Republicans in the Senate also voted against the aid package. So it is not a tiny minority of Republicans who are pro-Putin. When it came time to give military aid to Ukraine, 112 Republicans in the House, a majority of House Republicans, voted for Putin. 15 Republicans in the Senate voted for Putin. No country in Europe has this much support, political support, in their parliament for Putin as we do here in the United States. And you see it all the time as Trump, Vance, and Pete Hegseth only condemn Ukraine as the aggressor in all this. Never do they have anything bad to say about Putin. Trump said to Zelensky, "You should never have started this war." He believes, as do members of the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party, that given Russian history, given American history, Putin would never allow Ukraine, which is situated right up against the Russian border, to become a Western-aligned nation, both militarily and economically. Putin says Ukraine is part of Russia, and he says he aspires to rebuild not necessarily the Soviet Union, but the Russian Empire, made up of all the satellite countries populated by ethnic Russians. There were ethnic Germans in the Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia, and that's why Chamberlain signed away the Sudetenland to Hitler. It's just the ethnic Germans. For Putin, Ukraine is first and foremost a nation entirely made up of ethnic Russians. Putin said repeatedly that Ukrainian identity is false, that there are no Ukrainian people. He says there is no Ukraine because they are all Russian. So, it seems highly unlikely that Putin would stop and go no further than what amounts to the 30% of Ukraine Trump is willing to surrender. Well, one of the ways to prevent war is by standing up to bullies while at the same time being realistic. The lesson from the Cold War is don't be trigger happy. Some tensions are best left tense with no resolution, allowing time to settle all scores. Because empires eventually collapse on their own weight. And that's what happened to the Soviet Union. I know. Republicans like to believe Reagan defeated the evil Soviet Union by outspending them on the Star Wars missile defense. For those of you who are too young, Republicans want us to believe that Ronald Reagan single-handedly defeated Russia by outspending them on his Star Wars missile defense program. Gee, I wonder who benefits from that phony narrative. Let me give you a hint. The military-industrial complex. I love this one. This is the lie Reagan supporters, Republicans, tell and, because they're stupid, believe. The lie is that Reagan spent $30 billion. That's all it costs to defeat the Soviet Union. $30 billion on his Strategic Defense Initiative, which became known as the Star Wars program, the idea that we could shoot nuclear missiles out of the sky. And because he spent $30 billion, the Soviet Union collapsed. That is the Republican catechism about Ronald Reagan, that Ronald Reagan defeated the Soviet Union by bankrupting them because they couldn't keep up with our Star Wars defense spending. It's simply put, the Soviet Union was defeated because Reagan had $30 billion to spend that Gorbachev didn't. All we had to do, according to the Republicans, all Reagan had to do was give our weapons manufacturers $30 billion to build weapons that don't work, and the Soviet Union came crumbling down. That's what brought the Soviet Union crashing down. Nothing to do with their failed invasion of Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. Nothing to do with 3-week lines for toilet paper in Moscow. Nothing to do with the Pope or Lake Wałęsa and a universal cry for human rights and economic freedom. No! Reagan did it all by himself, simply by cutting a $30 billion check for weapons that never worked. Again, that's a wonderful lie for the military-industrial complex to tell. Simply by spending billions on weapons that never got used because they don't work, we defeated the Soviet Union. We didn't even have to fire a shot. We just had to cut the check, and we defeated the Soviet Union. Well, 10 years later, Bill Clinton scrapped most of the Star Wars plan because it was literally pie in the sky. Well, the message from Reagan was, you don't need to use weapons, you just have to keep building them. But that's not how it happened. The fact is, by doing everything to avoid nuclear war, by talking and negotiating and talking, time became our best friend. Time is what kept Russia and the United States from destroying the planet with their nuclear arsenals. It's why Kennedy, Nixon, even Reagan talked with the Soviets, negotiated weapons treaties with the Soviets. They hoped time would be on our side, not Russia's. And time was on our side, not Russia's. Russia collapsed. But we have Wall Street to blame for Putin, because after the Soviet Union collapsed, the bankers and financiers said, to the victors go the spoils. And they looted Moscow, transferring trillions of Russian assets overseas, something like, and I'm not making this up, 80% of Russia's entire GDP is sitting right now in foreign banks, as well as New York and London real estate, creating the conditions that gave rise to Putin and, as a matter of fact, Donald Trump. That's a whole other story. But then again, not really. A 2-year-old American citizen has been deported to Honduras by ICE. So warns a Louisiana judge who is scheduled a hearing next month, getting to the bottom of what happened to this child, who is simply referred to in court documents as VML. Wait, it gets a lot worse. U.S. District Judge Terry Doughty, appointed by Trump, said the child was deported Friday without any due process, and the judge accused ICE of deliberately misleading him. Really, ICE? ICE told the judge that VML's mother is not an American citizen, but VML is one, thanks to the 14th Amendment. And the mother said, if I'm deported, I want to bring my child with me. Judge Doughty said there is no evidence the mother actually said this, adding, this is the problem when you deport migrants without due process. Wait, it gets worse. Tricia McLaughlin is the spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security. She used to work for Vivek Ramaswamy. She said, Oh, no. The mother told ICE she wanted the child, who's an American citizen, to be deported with her. But a lawsuit filed by the father on Thursday indicates ICE never allowed him to speak to the mother, to talk about what to do about their 2-year-old child, who is an American citizen. But wait, it gets worse. According to Judge Dowdy, the mother was not breaking the law. She arrived with her sister and her 2-year-old American citizen. She arrived for a routine check-in at the New Orleans Office of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. She showed up to check in, as she was supposed to do. That's what law-abiding migrants do. They go for their routine check-ins with ICE. She was in the country legally with documents. She was participating in our system, but ICE grabbed her and the child, who was an American citizen, 2 years old, shipped them off to Honduras, didn't allow the child's father, who's in the United States, to talk to the mother, to even talk to ICE. The mother and the daughter, I don't know if it's a girl or not. I think it's a girl. The 2-year-old child, who's an American citizen, now in Honduras. Why? Because the cowards at ICE have to put numbers on the board. They just rounded up 900 over the weekend in Florida. So let me ask you, this is a woman with her 2-year-old child. Do they sound like violent criminals to you? I wonder what tattoos the 2-year-old American citizen had that convinced the idiots, the worthless scumbags from ICE, that she was a gang member. A mother and her 2-year-old kid. Are you feeling safer, America? Of course not. ICE is made up entirely of cowards. And cowards always go for the law-abiding, low-hanging fruit because it's safer. Real gang members, they have assault weapons. Round up the 2-year-olds. Big men, big women from ICE. If you work for ICE, you're worthless. You're worthless, and there's a special place in hell awaiting you. ICE should have been abolished when Biden was president and the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate. Even Kamala Harris said we had to rethink ICE. Every decent human being in this country knows ICE is a problem, not a solution. Wait, it gets worse. There is a lawsuit now maintaining the child's father attempted to prevent ICE from deporting his 2-year-old, an American citizen, but his lawyers are saying ICE refused to talk to him. They wouldn't let him talk to the mother. They wouldn't let him see his 2-year-old child. And the judge, again, complaining, this is what happens when you deny immigrants a due process hearing. And now it gets even worse. How could it be any worse, you ask? Late Saturday night, the Washington Post reporting 2 other children who are American citizens have been deported. One aged 4, the other age 7. Wait! It gets worse. Because we're talking about Trump. So how can it get worse than this? Think. Be creative. How could this story get even worse? Well, as I said, we've just found out that 2 other children, American citizens, were deported. One is 4, one is 7. How does it get worse? The 4-year-old American citizen who just got deported is suffering from stage 4 cancer. and ICE deported a 4-year-old American citizen suffering from stage 4 cancer without medication or the ability to contact their doctors. That's according to the Washington Post late Saturday night. So tell me again how I'm out of line when I call everyone who works for ICE worthless. I've been telling you to abolish ICE for 8 years now. I said, you go back and listen to my shows, I said ICE answers only to the president. They will turn into his palace guard if the wrong person gets elected president. And by palace guard, I mean the Gestapo. You think, remember, people say it's a slippery slope. First they come for the migrants, then they come for Americans. They're already coming, not just for American citizens, but children who are American citizens with stage 4 cancer. The FBI on Friday also arrested Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Hannah Dugan in her courthouse. They are arresting the judges now. FBI Director Kash Patel and Attorney General Pam Bondi celebrating the judge's arrest, accusing Judge Dugan of hiding an undocumented immigrant from ICE. His name is Eduardo Flores Ruiz. He's a 30-year-old Mexican citizen who reportedly was deported in 2013, and then he re-entered the country. Police just arrested him on battery charges, accusing him of assaulting his roommate. We don't know if that's true. We don't know. People get accused of assaulting. A lot of men are accused of sexually assaulting women in the changing room at Bergdorf Goodman. We don't know until a jury awards his victim, $80 million? We don't know if he actually is guilty. The FBI said ICE showed up at the courthouse for this guy Ruiz's arraignment. He was being arraigned on the battery charges. ICE showed up to grab and deport him. Well, of course they did, because they're lazy. They don't want to find real gang members. They go for the low-hanging fruit. They're hanging out outside courthouses looking for law-abiding migrants. Judge Dugan reportedly grew angry that ICE was using her courtroom to round up a migrant. Now, Milwaukee is not officially a sanctuary city, but it has limited cooperation with ICE. That's their policy. We're not going to cooperate with ICE, but it's not a sanctuary city. So, under our Constitution, and according to a recent Supreme Court ruling, local police, local communities cannot be ordered to do the work of the federal government. ICE cannot demand state and local officials help them deport migrants. It's against the Constitution, and the Supreme Court said so. The Supreme Court ruled that local police cannot be ordered to conduct, for example, this is a recent ruling, the local police cannot be ordered to commandeer a local police force or a judge or a city to conduct federally mandated background checks on people purchasing weapons. Because local police work for the city, not the federal government. So the Supreme Court, Scalia wrote this. The Supreme Court said it's okay for the federal government to have mandatory background checks for people who want to buy guns, but you cannot commandeer local police and order them to conduct background checks for people who want to purchase weapons. Well, the same applies to terrorizing migrant communities. You cannot commandeer judges, local judges, or the police and order them to cooperate with this reign of terror. Judge Dugan decided she was not going to do ICE's dirty work for them. She had a foreign national, this guy Ruiz, about to enter her courtroom. And yes, he was charged with assault. We're innocent until proven guilty in this country. And that's all he was going to be charged with. This is my courtroom, she said. And we don't know if he's guilty. He's been charged with assault. We're going to find out. She said, I have no intention of turning him over to ICE, you bottom feeders. That's what ICE is. They're just a bunch of bottom feeders feeding off the work of the Milwaukee Police Department. Go arrest your own migrants. You want to deport immigrants? Terrorize them? 2-year-olds and a 4-year-old with stage 4 cancer? Go do it by yourself. Judge Dugan became visibly angry. She called ICE's behavior absurd. She told the ICE agents that they had to speak with Milwaukee's chief judge if they want to arrest Ruiz. And as ICE agents went to speak with that judge, Judge Dugan is alleged to have told Ruiz, the immigrant, she's alleged to have said to Ruiz, follow me. And she then allegedly opened up a courthouse door and allowed him to run. Police eventually caught up with Ruiz and arrested him. Who's the hero in this? Not ICE, certainly not FBI Director Kash Patel, who deleted his celebratory tweet, which accused Judge Dugan of being a danger to the community, as she was handcuffed and taken to a federal jail. This is a photograph of her being handcuffed and taken to a federal jail. It was released by our FBI director, Kash Patel, who broke with FBI's policy of posting photographs of people being arrested and celebrating their arrest. It's considered unprofessional. Attorney General Pam Bondi warned that Judge Dugan is just one of the many judges she plans to prosecute for blocking ICE from doing its job. Well, ICE isn't doing its job. It's hanging out in courthouses. It's arresting the wrong people. They're not arresting gang members. They're not going after the really dangerous gang members because they're bullies and cowards. The White House saying, quote, the days of actively aiding and abetting illegal aliens invading our country are over. Judge Dugan's arraignment hearing is scheduled for May 15th. She is not being held in jail. Earlier this month, Trump announced he was lifting temporary protected legal status granted to 14,600 immigrants from Afghanistan who all now have to be out of our country by the end of May. Nice, right? Joe Biden and Trump, during his first administration, had given them protection for many reasons. Primarily, it isn't safe for them to return to Afghanistan because they would be considered collaborators. You might remember we invaded Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. These are people, many of whom were people who were on our side, who helped our soldiers. That's why they were given temporary protected legal status. It's not safe for them to go back to Afghanistan. Most of them are Muslim, but there are a few Christians. Few Christians. And so Republicans are working behind the scenes trying to get Christi Noem, our Director of Homeland Security, to renew protected legal status for any of the Afghans about to be deported who are Christian. You know, equal protection under the law. Politico reporting that Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham and leader of Billy Graham Ministries, Franklin Graham met privately with Christi Noem last week to see if there can be a special waiver for these Christians. The Muslims? Them, he couldn't care less about. Franklin Graham is only concerned about Afghan Christians being sent back to Afghanistan. Muslims, take them all. He wants them out of the country. In 2014, Franklin Graham called Islam a religion of war, telling his fellow Christians when they meet a Muslim, you should try to convert that Muslim to Christianity. Franklin Graham refused to apologize for calling Islam wicked and evil right after 9/11. A birther, Graham repeatedly accused Barack Obama of being a Muslim. He didn't say Obama was a Muslim. He accused him of being Muslim. 5 years ago, Franklin Graham had to cancel a series of appearances in the United Kingdom because his attacks against Islam and the LGBTQ community violated England's ban on hate speech. Graham has also said gay conversion therapy works. You just have to accept Jesus into your heart. Wow, homosexuality is cured by loving another man. Got it. Got it. Thanks. He's called homosexuality part of Satan's plan to launch a full-scale assault against Christianity. He also said Pete Buttigieg's homosexuality, quote, is something to be repentant of, not something to be flaunted, praised, or politicized, unquote. That's the monster meeting with our head of Homeland Security, Christi Noem. The monster, Franklin Graham, who endangers the lives of Muslims and members of the LGBTQ community by covering hate crimes with the patina of Christian love. And he is welcomed into the White House and greeted by our Director of Homeland Security. This is the one who's lobbying on behalf of Christian Afghans, but not the Muslims. He wants the Muslims thrown out. He meets with the head of our Homeland Security. Homeland Security is supposed to keep people safe, not work with people like Franklin Graham, who create hate crimes. When there's a hate crime, Franklin Graham is partly responsible because the people committing those hate crimes think they're doing the work of Jesus, thanks to people like Franklin Graham. Well, some of you have corrected me for saying Christi Noem's Louis Vuitton bag was stolen. They pointed out it was a Gucci bag and not a Louis Vuitton. Well, you're half right. Her Louis Vuitton bag or wallet was inside her Gucci bag. That's the truth. It was sort of like a Russian nesting doll of tastelessly conspicuous consumption. You might recall Christi Noem was taking her stupid family out for an Easter dinner at Capitol Burger in Washington, D.C. last Sunday when a masked bandit somehow got past our Secret Service and grabbed her Gucci bag sitting underneath her chair. It was a bag holding her Louis Vuitton wallet and bag, her passport, her driver's license, Department of Homeland Security badge, her makeup bag, and $3,000 in cash. Do you know who Ed Martin is? You're going to be hearing a lot about him. He is the new Washington, D.C. federal attorney. He's a piece of, well, let's just say work. He is now claiming they've caught one of the two men who stole Christi Noem's bag. Ed Martin claims it was an undocumented immigrant. But you can't trust Ed Martin. He is a Trump appointee who just got called out for sending threatening letters with the Department of Justice's logo on them. Sent these letters to 3 medical publications, including the New England Journal of Medicine, accusing them of bias, and he's threatening to prosecute them for bias. 3 medical journals. New England Journal of Medicine says, we got this threatening letter from this federal prosecutor, Ed Martin, who says he's going to prosecute us for bias, but he won't explain what the bias is. This is Ed Martin. He also helped organize the Stop the Steal rally that turned into January 6th. He raised money for one of the insurrectionists who has been caught on tape spewing anti-Semitism while dressed like Adolf Hitler. He's also sending letters to Wikipedia using the Department of Justice stationery, saying he's going to prosecute them for spreading foreign propaganda. So you'll be hearing a lot more about Ed Martin. He has been temporarily appointed by Trump. He's got to be confirmed by the Senate. Those will be some fun confirmation hearings. So, are you wondering why Christi Noem was carrying $3,000 in cash? Why? Well, Tricia McLaughlin, the spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security, she used to work for Vivek Ramaswamy, she said, well, of course, I couldn't expect coastal elitists to understand why Christi Noem was carrying $3,000 in cash. And then she explained, that's what ranchers from South Dakota do. That was her explanation. Ranchers from South Dakota carry $3,000 in their pocket. And Christi Noem is a rancher. So she carries $3,000 in cash. Why? Why would a rancher like Christi Noem carry $3,000? To get the sheep to keep their mouths shut. Here's $500. Tell everybody my husband was a perfect gentleman, or else. Got it, lamb chop? Gets lonely out on the ranch, especially if you got to go home to the dog-killing Christi Noem. Remember she said she met with Rocket Man? She also claimed in her book she had high-level meetings with Kim Jong-un, the head of North Korea. She was lying about that. And she bragged about killing cricket. Good person. Christi says she believes, Christi Noem says she believes the criminal who stole her bag was a professional. No, compared to you, Christi Noem, anybody seems like a professional. Who leaves all that under their seat? How is it possible for the head of the Department of Homeland Security to keep her job if she can't even keep her Gucci bag? Well, so far, the bag has not been returned to the bag. The douchebag has not gotten the bag returned. The Secret Service says it's launched an investigation. House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Mark Green said he will launch his own investigation next week to determine whether this might be indicative of severe lapses in our nation's security. How about deporting a 4-year-old with stage 4 cancer who's an American citizen? I think that should answer your question. But good news, the $50,000 Rolex watch that Christi Noem wore for the photo shoot inside the El Salvador prison wasn't stolen. That wasn't stolen. $3,000 in cash, $50,000 Rolex. I guess Trump pays well. I guess it pays well. Well, Noem is in charge of Homeland Security. And one of the government agencies folded into Homeland Security is FEMA. FEMA, they come to our rescue after a natural disaster. You might remember last year on the campaign trail, Trump accused Joe Biden of leaving red districts in Georgia, as well as North and South Carolina, to die after Hurricane Helene. Remember that? It was in October of last year. Trump and the racist, homophobe Franklin Graham toured the damage in October, and they offered up some hollow prayers in Franklin Graham Ministries, which pays Franklin Graham close to $1 million a year, because that's what Jesus would get paid. They delivered some measly supplies to people in need. And while they were doing that, Trump lied, claimed Georgia Governor, Republican Brian Kemp, couldn't get President Biden on the phone to work out FEMA's response. It was a lie. Kemp, as well as Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, South Carolina Republican Governor Henry McMaster, all thanked Biden for the great job he and FEMA were doing, rescuing their states after Hurricane Helene. But Donald Trump kept lying. Franklin Graham kept lying, calling Biden's response to Hurricane Helene worse than Bush's response to Hurricane Katrina. He created panic, is what he did. He convinced a lot of red state MAGA morons that Biden was leaving them to die and that the government was never coming to help. This was October of last year. Remember, Deanne Criswell, head of FEMA back then, begged Trump, stop spreading lies. You're hurting people. You're hurting the people who need to be helped, and you're making it unsafe for FEMA workers to deliver aid. She said, quote, "It's really a shame that he's putting politics ahead of helping people." Trump doesn't care. Trump doesn't care. Trump's lies endangered the lives of rescue workers and the people they were trying to rescue, because Trump supporters were being told FEMA was coming to seize their property. It was beyond the height of irresponsibility, especially when you consider Trump's response to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. Because of those lackluster efforts to save people of color in Puerto Rico, his response to Hurricane Maria turned out to be far deadlier than George W. Bush's failure to rescue the black people living in New Orleans in 2005 after Katrina. One of the most underreported stories is Trump's 2017 failure to help Puerto Rico after Maria hit. When Puerto Rico got hit, Trump told FEMA to worry about Houston, which was still recovering from Hurricane Harvey. He said, forget Puerto Rico. They don't vote for president. That's what he said. Stay in Houston, which was doing fine. Forget Puerto Rico. This is him throwing the, tossing paper towels to the people of Puerto Rico and then never returning. Puerto Rico went 3 years after that without any significant federal assistance, no power. wasn't until Biden became president that the government came to their rescue. Trump, as much as he lied about Biden's FEMA response after Hurricane Helene, Trump doesn't believe in FEMA. He has said it's not the federal government's responsibility to respond to and pay for natural disasters. But this is becoming a political problem for Trump because the states most susceptible to climate catastrophe are the old Confederacy, the red states. And another one of the most underreported stories right now is how Trump, during his first 100 days back in office, is leaving the states that voted for him to die. 3 deep red states, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi, were hit by deadly tornadoes during the first week of April, killing at least 35, causing about $2.5 billion in damages. Thanks to climate catastrophe, the United States is having much more severe tornadoes, especially this year, with the tornadoes now packing a much harder punch than they ever did before, especially in red states. Last year, after tornadoes hit Texas and Ohio, Biden didn't hesitate to deliver disaster relief, even though they don't vote for Democrats. This year, however, the governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, begging her old boss, Donald Trump, to declare an emergency after tornadoes hit her state. He won't do it. Mississippi's governor, Tennessee's governor, all begging Trump to provide emergency relief after these tornadoes hit their states earlier this month. And Trump saying, I can't hear you, not coming to the phone. This is the new normal. And Trump figures when it comes to deep red states, where are you going to go? Who else are you going to vote for? I can leave you to die, and you'll still vote for me because I demonize the transgender community. Disasters strike, unfortunately. And that's where the rubber, as they say, meets the road. It's not what you say, it's what you do. We saw how Trump responded to COVID, 1 million dead. We saw how Bush responded to Katrina. We saw how Trump responded to Puerto Rico. We saw how Trump, on the other hand, was forced to lie about Biden's response to Hurricane Helene. He can only lie. He cannot help. Now, who knows? Maybe Trump will just lie and say, Arkansas, Tennessee, they got their tornado relief. But I doubt he'll be able to pull this one off. We saw how he responded to the fires in Los Angeles when he first came back into office. Los Angeles was on fire, and instead of helping, he blamed the Democratic leadership in California and did what he's only able to do: lie. That's all he can do is lie. And he claimed the problem in Los Angeles was they didn't have enough water. Not true. Not only did Trump lie about the water, he also ordered the Army Corps of Engineers to flood California's Central Valley, wasting precious water in a publicity stunt, pretending to send water to Los Angeles, even though he was told by the Army Corps of Engineers repeatedly, Los Angeles doesn't need more water. And this water that you're telling us to unleash, it's not going to end up in Southern California. It's just going to flood some farmland, which it did. But he did it anyway. because the lie is way more important. The lie is way more important. Trump turns 79 on June 14th. 4 years from now, he's 83. And according to the Constitution, no longer president. That's what the Constitution says. He's already hinting at a third term. So forget what the law says. Trump's already selling Trump 2028 merch. He's convinced there are ways around the 22nd Amendment, which forbids him from ever becoming president again. The Constitution says he can't become president again, but the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, the Insurrection Clause, also said he couldn't be president again. When it comes to Trump, there's only power and fear. The power and fear emanate primarily from his popularity. If he's politically viable, the Constitution isn't worth the paper it's written on, the parchment it's written on. What is it, sheepskin, lambskin? Now, he lost in 2020, refused to leave office, literally kicking and screaming. He left office. 2028, 2029 is going to be tricky, and I'm not being glib here. What matters now, as we're coming to the end of his first 100 days, is his popularity. If he finds himself, he's down to 40% now, which is the worst performance of any president in modern American history during their first 100 days. He's the least popular president in modern American history. If he ever finds himself sitting on top of, say, a 60% approval rating, if he jumps 20 points, he's never been above water. He's never cracked 50%. In the nearly 10 years Trump has been on the scene, he's never cracked. He's always been more unpopular than he is popular, below 50%. But life is strange. If the polling averages somehow put him at about 10 points above water, especially after the midterms, then we have a problem. And if the Democrats fail to take back either the Senate or the House after the midterms, they have to win one of those. If the Democrats can't win the House or the Senate during the midterms, and Trump is sitting on a 60% approval rating, maybe even 51% approval rating, maybe a 40% approval rating, if the Republicans still control the House and the Senate after the midterms, it won't matter what the law says. He's going to run. As they say in Silicon Valley, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is permission. And I can easily imagine a Republican-controlled House and Senate passing a series of laws challenging the 22nd Amendment. These laws would be glaringly unconstitutional, but this Supreme Court, I have no doubt, would slow walk the appeals process and conceivably could end up deciding it's not for the Supreme Court to rule on the constitutionality of the 22nd Amendment during an election year. Let the people decide. Which is what they pretty much ruled last July about presidential immunity. So we're looking at a real possibility of another constitutional crisis. There's no such thing as a constitutional crisis. That's past. The Supreme Court and this Republican Party could give a rat's ass about the Constitution. That ship has sailed. We're no longer approaching a constitutional crisis. Well, so far, Trump's presidency is a disaster, and that's reflected in his polling. He's down to a 40% approval rating. Worst performance of any modern American president in their first 100 days. The protests, much larger than the media is reporting. But these poll numbers and the protests must translate into victory for the Democrats. That's how it works. A new Fox News poll shows only 38% of Americans want Trump to cut taxes for the rich. I'm surprised it's even that high. 33% approve of his tariffs. I'm surprised it's even that high. When it comes to inflation, only 33% say he's doing a good job. This is disastrous for him. His overall handling of the economy, 38% approval rating. This is not good. It's horrible. But compared to what? This is why he's still viable. We don't know how Trump compares to the alternative. I have some friends who wring their hands over Trump and always end up voting for him because Biden was worse. Hillary was worse. Kamala is worse. I hate Trump, but they're worse. No, you're worse. The economy right now isn't plunging, but consumer confidence is. According to the leading index of consumer confidence that comes out of the University of Michigan, consumer confidence is now down 32% since Trump returned to office. It plunged 32%. Not since the 1990 recession have they seen a drop like this. Now, you might remember that was, 35 years ago? George Herbert Walker Bush was president at the time, and we know what happened to him by 1992. Even after George Herbert Walker Bush won the Gulf War in 1991, he had an approval rating in the 80s. That was 1991. By 1992, out the door. Clinton became president. Why? Because of the economy. Don't say because of Ross Perot. That's been disproven. Clinton did not win because of Ross Perot splitting the vote. It's for another show. George Herbert Walker Bush, out the door in 92, and it turns out they're not even sure it was a recession back then. Problem is, it felt like a recession. The same way people felt like Biden had given us a recession, despite all the yardsticks telling us he had given us the greatest economy in American history. Too many Americans felt we were in a major recession. Why? Because Donald Trump and the Republicans are liars. They know when it comes to the economy, too often it's how the voters feel, not what the yardsticks are telling us. And when you're a profligate liar like Donald Trump, you can convince really stupid Americans to believe anything. You can get them to feel there's a recession. You can get them to feel there's a border crisis, even though the number of crossings are at a 5-year low. You can convince them that crime is up when it's down. You can convince them that unemployment is through the roof. You can convince them of the complete opposite by lying. Ugh. Poll after poll now showing great dissatisfaction with Donald Trump. 85% of Americans saying they're insecure about their financial future. So not even 100 days. This is a disaster. With Trump, it always gets worse. What's going to happen? Is it going to get worse? What will be worse is an actual depression, an actual recession, what we saw in his last year, back in 2020, when he crapped the bed on COVID. Now, Reagan came into office in 81, gave America the worst recession since the Korean War. And he was looking like a one-term president. But Reagan got the bad news out of the way early and went on to get reelected in 1984, winning 49 states, just losing Minnesota, where his opponent, Walter Mondale, was from. And of course, he lost Washington, D.C., because there's a large black population in Washington, D.C., and Ronald Reagan was a racist. That's according to his own son, Ron Jr. Said, I love my dad, love him, but he was a racist. And he was. Began his official campaign for president in Philadelphia, Mississippi, the site of Shermer and Cheney, the civil rights activists getting killed. He was dog whistling racism. Well, scandals used to bring down a president, but thanks to the Supreme Court's immunity ruling last July, not anymore. There are accusations of insider trading going on right now inside the White House. Shocking. Shocking. A reporter for Fox Business News says the White House has been tipping off some investors on the status of high-profile trade deals. But now that very same reporter from Fox, who broke the story, saying that doesn't constitute insider trading. And he may be correct. There is the appearance of insider trading, and then there is what the Supreme Court now says is illegal insider trading. For example, if a White House employee, I don't know, Howard Lutnick, I'm just pulling a name out of my ass. Actually, I'm pulling an ass out of my ass, Howard Lutnick. I'm just, former head of Cantor Fitzgerald. His son now runs Cantor Fitzgerald. I'm not saying Howard Lutnick is guilty of insider trading. I'm just, if I had to pick a name, that's the first thing that comes to mind. If Howard Lutnick is on the phone with a Wall Street investor, giving that investor a tip about how the tariff negotiations are going, it might be inferred by a jury that, I don't know, Howard Lutnick is getting something in return. And by getting something in return, that would be the crime of insider trading. But if that White House employee, let's say Howard Lutnick, can convince a jury that the information was shared either by accident or with no financial motive, what do I, let's say Howard Lutnick, I have $1 billion. Why? What financial motive? I have more money than I need. Why would I? And so if you were to prosecute somebody like, and I'm just pulling Howard Lutnick out of thin air, if you were to try to prosecute him for insider trading, it would be hard to get a conviction. Again, I have no reason to believe that Howard Lutnick, who used to run the Wall Street firm of Cantor Fitzgerald and now is Commerce Secretary and the point man on the tariffs, I have no reason to believe that Howard Lutnick would be on the phone with investors, giving them a heads up on how, say, a trade deal with India is going. Does Howard Lutnick seem like the kind of person who would do something like that? Absolutely. If I were a betting man, I would bet that it's Howard Lutnick. But I don't know. I don't know if Howard Lutnick is doing that. It wouldn't surprise me. Somebody should look into the trades that Howard Lutnick's son, who now runs Cantor Fitzgerald, has made in the past couple of weeks. Not saying anything illegal. I'm not saying any crimes have been committed. Trump was asked on his flight to Rome. By the way, he got the front row. They had put him in the third row for the funeral. He spoke to somebody. He slipped the maitre d' here's a little money, and in his blue suit, he sat in the front row. On the flight to Rome, he was asked if he was engaging in insider trading. That you should even have to ask that question. What an insult to this man. Trump was asked specifically about whether information about a trade deal with India had been shared with a Wall Street investor, and Trump said, "Not that I know of," adding, "I doubt it because I only hire honorable people." And so he said insider trading isn't an issue. Like I said, liar. He's a liar. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I don't know what I would do without you people. Thank you to Mila and Bob in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. I read all your comments. If I made a mistake, correct me. I got the Louis Vuitton bag wrong. Sort of. It was a Louis Vuitton bag inside a Gucci bag that got stolen from the douchebag. So thank you for your comments. Keep leaving comments. I didn't say hello again. Welcome to the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman. Goodbye. I gotta just... what else? Watch other shows, and the host will ask you to do things. And do what they ask you to do, but do it for me. Like this episode, share this episode, subscribe to this channel, subscribe to my newsletter, and most importantly, brush your teeth and get your craw looked at. You know, we all get a lot of things stuck in our craw, and it stays there unless you get it drained. And my brother-in-law, Larry, had an abscess, almost had septic shock from all the stuff that was getting stuck in his craw. Does anybody even know what thing? I don't even know if people know what a craw is. Goodbye. Thank you.